You're hosting every holiday from now on. You have the biggest house, my brother declared. Stop complaining, Mom added. When I said no, Dad warned. Don't ask us for anything later. I smiled, understood. 4 months later, their pipes burst during a freeze. 22 missed calls. I texted one word. My brother told me I was hosting every holiday because I had the biggest house. My mom told me to stop complaining. My dad told me not to come asking for anything if I said no. So I said one word, understood, and I meant it. 4 months later, their pipes burst in a January freeze, and I had 22 missed calls on my phone. I texted back the same word. They didn't celebrate it that time. My name is Grant Holloway. I am 36 years old, and the house at the center of this story took me 9 years to afford. Not 9 years of waiting for an inheritance or hoping for a windfall. 9 years of working as an HVAC technician during the day and picking up side jobs on weekends. Duct installations, furnace repairs, emergency calls at 2 in the morning when someone's heat went out and they were willing to pay double. My wife Camille worked as a dental hygienist and bartended 3 nights a week for the first 4 years of our marriage. We didn't go on a honeymoon. We didn't buy new cars. We ate at home 6 nights a week and packed lunches every morning in matching Tupperware containers that we bought on sale at Target. We were not glamorous people. We were people with a plan. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial on a half-acre lot at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes outside the city. We bought it as a foreclosure, which meant it was cheap and it was ugly. The kitchen had water damage. The basement flooded during heavy rain. 2 of the bathrooms needed to be gutted. The backyard was a tangle of overgrown shrubs and cracked concrete. Camille and I spent the first 2 years renovating it ourselves. I handled the mechanical work because that was my trade, and Camille handled everything else with a combination of YouTube tutorials, library books, and a stubbornness that bordered on supernatural. By the time we were finished, the house looked like something out of a home magazine, and every square inch of it had been earned with our hands, our time, and our money. Nobody in my family helped with the renovation. Nobody offered. My brother Preston came over once during the first month, looked at the gutted kitchen, said, "Better you than me," and left. My mother Denise visited after we'd finished the living room and said it was nice, in the tone people use when they're acknowledging something without being impressed by it. My father Howard never came to see the house during the renovation at all. He showed up for the first time at a 4th of July barbecue Camille and I hosted after everything was done, walked through the finished rooms with his hands in his pockets, and said, "Big place for 2 people." That was his entire review. Big place for 2 people. Not, "You did a great job," or "I'm proud of you." Just an observation that we had more space than we needed, delivered with the implication that excess space in the Holloway family was a shared resource. That barbecue was the beginning of the end, although I didn't know it yet. Preston is 39. He is my older brother by 3 years, and has been coasting on charisma and entitlement since before I was old enough to understand what either of those words meant. Preston rents a 2-bedroom apartment with his wife Avery in a complex near the mall. He has worked in pharmaceutical sales for 11 years and makes decent money, but he spends it the way water moves through an open drain, fast, in every direction, with nothing to show for it when the flow stops. Avery is a real estate agent who talks about luxury properties. She sells the way other people talk about vacation homes they own. She drives a leased BMW. She wears designer bags. She posts photos from open houses of million-dollar listings with captions like, "Another day at the office," as though she lives there instead of in a 2-bedroom apartment with laminate countertops and a parking spot next to the dumpster. They are, in the kindest possible terms, people who perform wealth they don't have. And they have never once invited Camille and me to their apartment for anything. Not dinner, not coffee, not a birthday, not a holiday. Not once in the entire time I've been an adult. My mother Denise operates on guilt the way most people operate on oxygen. She breathes it in, processes it, and exhales it in the direction of whoever is closest. She has a talent for making reasonable boundaries sound like moral failures. If you said no to something, you were selfish. If you questioned something, you were ungrateful. If you pushed back on anything, she would invoke the concept of family the way a lawyer invokes a statute, as an authority that superseded your personal preferences and rendered your objections irrelevant. Denise never yelled. She didn't have to. She had developed a conversational tone that combined disappointment, surprise, and quiet martyrdom into a single frequency that could bypass every rational defense you had and land directly in the part of your brain that still wanted your mother's approval. My father, Howard, was the enforcer. Where Denise used guilt, Howard used consequence. He was a retired electrician with hands like leather and a communication style that consisted primarily of short, declarative sentences that hit like nails being driven into wood. Howard didn't argue. He issued verdicts. If you disagreed with him, he didn't raise his voice. He simply downgraded your status in the family hierarchy with a sentence or two and moved on. He was the kind of man who believed that proximity to family was a form of currency, and that withdrawing from family obligations was the same as bankruptcy. In Howard's world, you paid in or you were cut off. There was no middle ground. After that first 4th of July barbecue, the requests started arriving. Thanksgiving that year, why don't you host? You've got all that space. Christmas, it just makes sense, Grant, your kitchen is huge. Easter, the kids love your backyard. 4th of July again, nobody else has a yard like yours. Each time, it was framed as a compliment. What a great house. What a big kitchen. What a beautiful yard. But compliments with expectations attached aren't compliments. They're invoices disguised as flattery. Camille and I hosted everything. For 3 straight years, every major holiday passed through our front door. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, Labor Day, and various birthdays that somehow always ended up at our place because it's easier. We cooked. We cleaned. We set up tables and chairs. We bought the turkey, the ham, the sides, the drinks, the desserts, the paper plates when we ran out of real ones, the extra napkins, the ice, the charcoal, the decorations, the plastic cups for the kids, the garbage bags, the tinfoil, the cleaning supplies. Camille tracked the costs after the second year because she was starting to feel like something was off and wanted to see the numbers. The numbers confirmed what she already felt. We were spending between $800 and $1,200 per holiday on food and supplies alone. Over 3 years, the grocery and hosting costs totaled approximately $9,600. Utility spikes during large gatherings, heating the house for 20 people in December, running the AC for 20 people in July, the water, the electricity, added another $1,800. And then there were the things that got broken and never replaced. A dining chair that Preston's youngest snapped the leg off during a tantrum. A ceramic vase Camille's mother had given us that was knocked off a shelf during a Christmas party and shattered on the tile floor. A couch cushion stained with red wine that Avery spilled and dabbed at with a wet napkin for 30 seconds before moving to a different seat. Replacement and repair costs, approximately $1,200. Total cost of being the family's holiday venue for 3 years, just over $12,600. Offers to help cook, 0. Offers to help clean, 0. Offers to contribute to groceries, 0. Offers to host at their own homes instead, 0. Thank yous that went beyond a generic good food, tossed over a shoulder on the way out the door, 0. Camille said it to me one night after a particularly exhausting Easter cleanup. She was scrubbing a pan at 11 p.m. while I bagged trash in the backyard, and her voice carried the flat, measured tone of a woman who had been patient for exactly as long as she intended to be. We are running a restaurant for people who don't tip, don't reserve, and don't leave reviews. And we're paying for the privilege. She was right, and I told her she was right. But I didn't do anything about it yet, because the machine was still running and I hadn't found the switch. The switch came on a Saturday in September. We were hosting a back-to-school dinner for Preston's kids, which, let me be clear, was not a holiday and was not something either Camille or I had agreed to. Preston had simply texted the family group chat and said, "Back-to-school dinner at Grant's this Saturday. Bring the kids. 5 p.m. Like he was booking a conference room. Like my home came with a reservation system and his name was on the calendar. I was annoyed but hadn't yet decided whether to push back when the thing happened that changed everything. Midway through the dinner, which Camille and I cooked, served, and would later clean up entirely alone, Preston stood up from the table, tapped his fork against his glass like he was giving a toast, and made an announcement. "So I've been thinking," he said, looking around the table at our parents, at Avery, at the kids, at me and Camille. "From now on, all holidays are officially here. Grant's house. It's the biggest, it's the nicest, the kitchen is set up for it, and everybody's comfortable here. It just makes the most sense." He said it with the confidence of a man issuing a corporate memo. Not a question, not a suggestion, a declaration. He was standing in my dining room, at my table, eating food my wife had cooked, and he was announcing to my family that my home was now the permanent venue for every family gathering going forward. Denise nodded before he even finished. He's right, Grant. You should be grateful people want to come here. Stop complaining. I hadn't complained. I hadn't said a single word. She was preemptively shutting down an objection I hadn't made, which told me she'd expected one, which told me she knew, on some level, that what Preston was doing was unreasonable. I looked at Camille. She was sitting very still, her fork resting on the edge of her plate, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between her glass and the centerpiece. She wasn't eating. She wasn't looking at anyone. She had the expression of a woman watching something be stolen in broad daylight, while the thief explains why it was always theirs to begin with. We've been hosting for 3 straight years, I said, keeping my voice calm. Every holiday. We cook, we clean, we pay for everything. Nobody else has offered once. We'd like to share the responsibility. Howard set down his fork. He looked at me the way he'd looked at me my entire life, with the steady, unblinking assessment of a man deciding how much authority to exert. Then he said, "Don't say no and then come asking us for anything later. Family goes both ways, Grant." It was a threat, phrased as a principle, delivered as a verdict, but fundamentally a threat. Agree to let us use your home whenever we want, or we'll cut you off. That was the deal. That was the contract my father was offering me at my own dinner table. I looked at Howard. I looked at Denise. I looked at Preston, who was already leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who considers the matter closed. I looked at Avery, who was scrolling her phone and not paying attention. And I looked at Camille, who finally met my eyes with a look that said, very clearly, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But decide." I smiled. And I said, "Understood." One word. I let it sit there. Preston nodded. Denise sent a thumbs-up emoji to the group chat in real time, while sitting at my table. Howard went back to eating. The conversation moved on. They thought I'd agreed. They thought understood meant compliance, that I had absorbed the instruction and would execute it as given. But understood didn't mean yes. It meant I finally understood who they were, what they valued, what I was to them, and what I was going to do about it. That night, after everyone left and Camille and I were alone in the kitchen, her washing, me drying, the house still smelling like the roast she'd spent 4 hours preparing, she said it plainly. They just claimed our home as family property, in front of us, while eating food I made, in chairs we bought, under a roof we rebuilt with our own hands. She set a plate in the drying rack and looked at me. "I'm done, Grant. I love you and I will support whatever you decide. But I am done feeding people who think this house is a buffet with a mortgage." I put the dish towel down and pulled her into a hug. I held on for a long time. And I said, "We're done." The next 2 weeks were quiet. I didn't make a scene. I didn't send a manifesto to the family chat. I sat down at the kitchen table one evening and went through 3 years of receipts, bank statements, and credit card records. I documented every grocery run for every holiday, every utility bill spike, every broken item, every cost associated with being the Holloway family's permanent venue. The spreadsheet wasn't for ammunition, it was for clarity. I needed to see the full picture to make sure I wasn't being unreasonable, because that's what people like Denise train you to do. Doubt yourself even when the evidence is staring at you from a screen at midnight. The evidence was clear. $12,600 over 3 years. 0 reciprocity. 0 acknowledgement. And a family that believed my front door was a revolving one that they could spin whenever they felt like it. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I sent a message to the family group chat. Short, clean, no emotion. "We won't be hosting Thanksgiving this year. Feel free to make other arrangements. Happy holidays to everyone." The chat erupted within minutes. "Preston, what? We already told Avery's parents it's at your place." Denise, "Grant, you can't do this 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. People are counting on you." Howard, "I warned you." Avery, "This is so inconsiderate. I already arranged my schedule around this." I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I typed one message: "We won't be hosting. Have a great Thanksgiving." Then I muted the chat. Nobody else stepped up. That was the part that confirmed everything I already knew. There were 4 other households in the Holloway family orbit: Preston and Avery's apartment, Denise and Howard's house. Two cousins with their own places, and not one of them offered to host. The issue had never been about who had the biggest house. It had been about who was willing to do the work. And without me volunteering, nobody was. Preston texted me privately 3 days after my announcement. "You're really going to do this?" "Mom is stressed out. She's been calling everyone trying to figure out a plan." I typed back, "She could host. Their house isn't big enough." It was big enough for every Thanksgiving before Camille and I bought ours. Somehow the family survived. He didn't respond, because he knew I was right. For the first 20-something years of Holloway family history, holidays happened at Denise and Howard's perfectly adequate 3-bedroom house. The food was simpler, the space was tighter, and nobody complained, because that's what family was before my kitchen renovation became a reason to outsource the entire operation. Thanksgiving was held at a chain restaurant off the highway. Denise booked a long table in the back corner. The turkey was dry. The sides came from a buffet line. The rolls were cold. Preston's kids were restless and kept climbing under the table, while Avery scrolled her phone with the disconnected expression of a woman who had been promised a different kind of evening. Howard sat at the head of the table, which wasn't really the head, it was just the end closest to the window, and ate without speaking. The check came to $340 for the family, and Preston suggested they split it evenly, which meant Denise and Howard, on a fixed income, paid the same as Preston and Avery, who had no children's meals to cover. Nobody noticed the math. Nobody noticed a lot of things. Avery posted nothing on social media, which, for Avery, was the equivalent of a public mourning period. Denise called me on Thanksgiving evening. I answered because I was feeling generous and because Camille and I had just finished the best Thanksgiving of our lives. Just the two of us, a perfectly roasted chicken, mashed potatoes made from scratch, a pumpkin pie from Camille's grandmother's recipe, a bottle of wine, and the overwhelming, almost disorienting piece of a quiet house that belonged entirely to us. Camille had set the table with actual candles, something she'd never done for the family dinners because she'd learned there was no point in making things beautiful for people who didn't notice. "This doesn't feel like family, Grant," Denise said. She was crying. The quiet, hiccuping kind that comes when someone is sad and also confused about why they're sad, because they haven't yet connected their current unhappiness to their own choices. "It didn't feel like family when you were at my house either, Mom. It felt like catering." She didn't have a response. She cried a little more. I told her I loved her and hung up. Camille was leaning in the kitchen doorway listening. She didn't say anything. She just walked over, kissed me on the forehead, and went back to her pie. That was her version of "I'm proud of you," and I received it loud and clear. Christmas, same. We declined to host. The family scrambled. Someone suggested Denise and Howard's house, but Denise said it was too small and not set up for entertaining, which was her way of saying she didn't want to do the work she'd been outsourcing to me for 3 years. Christmas happened at Preston's apartment, which was exactly as cramped and uncomfortable as you'd imagine. Avery spent the evening apologizing for the size of their living room. Preston spent it pointing out that none of this would be necessary if Grant would just stop being difficult. The kids opened presents on a carpet that smelled faintly of the dog Preston and Avery had adopted 6 months ago and apparently never trained. New Year's Eve, Camille and I went to a resort on the coast. 3 nights. Ocean view room. We ate seafood, walked on the beach, slept in until 10, and posted exactly 1 photo. The two of us at sunset, cocktails in hand, looking like people who had just remembered what their lives were supposed to feel like. I didn't caption it. I didn't need to. The photo said everything. We are here, we are happy, and we are not cooking for 20 people in a kitchen that nobody thanked us for building. January arrived hard. A polar vortex dropped into the region like a hammer, and temperatures plunged to single digits for 6 consecutive days. Camille and I were fine. Our house was winterized properly. I'd wrapped the pipes myself, insulated the crawl space, serviced the furnace in October, and installed a backup space heater in the basement just in case. When you work in HVAC, you don't get caught by winter. You prepare for it. Denise and Howard's house was not prepared. On the 4th day of the freeze, their pipes burst. A main line in the basement cracked and sent water flooding across the foundation. The damage was immediate and extensive: standing water in the basement, saturated drywall, ruined carpet, and no functional plumbing. The furnace, overwhelmed by the cold and now surrounded by water, shut down. The house dropped to 40 degrees within hours. I was at work when my phone started buzzing. I was underneath a commercial air handler in an office building, replacing a compressor relay, when I felt the vibration against my thigh. I ignored it because I was holding a wrench and a flashlight and didn't have a free hand. By the time I climbed down and checked during lunch, sitting in the cab of my work truck with a thermos of coffee and a sandwich Camille had packed that morning, I had 22 missed calls. 22. I stared at the notification screen the way you stare at something that confirms what you already knew was coming. Denise, 8 calls. Howard, 6. Preston, 5. Avery, 3. Voicemails stacked like bricks, each one more urgent than the last. Denise, 9:14 a.m. Tight but controlled. Grant, please call me back. Something happened at the house. The pipes. Preston, 9:47 a.m. Trying to sound authoritative. Bro, Mom and Dad's pipes burst. It's bad. Water everywhere. Call me back. Denise, 10:22 a.m. Now crying. Grant, honey, we need help. The basement is completely flooded. Your father doesn't know what to do. Please. Howard, 10:58 a.m. Voice flat and stripped of its usual authority. Grant, call me. Preston, 11:30 a.m. Aggressive. Where are you? Mom and Dad's house is freezing. They need to stay somewhere tonight. Your house is the only one big enough. Call me. Avery, 11:45 a.m. Managing to sound inconvenienced even during someone else's emergency. Grant, this is a real emergency. Stop ignoring people and step up. Howard, 12:03 p.m. 6 words in a voice I had never heard from my father. Not commanding, not cold, just old and tired and something close to afraid. Son, we need you. Please call. That last one sat in my chest like a stone. Because Howard Holloway did not say please. Howard Holloway did not ask. He issued statements and expected compliance. And here he was, 6 words, sounding like a man who had just realized that the son he'd threatened to cut off was the only one with the tools, the training, and the house to fix what had broken. I sat in my work truck reading these messages and feeling something complicated. Not satisfaction, not cruelty, not even vindication. Something closer to the quiet ache you feel when a prediction you didn't want to make comes true exactly the way you knew it would. I had told them this would happen. Not the pipes. I couldn't have predicted that. But the dynamic. The moment when they would need something from me and discover that the bridge they'd been taxing had a toll booth they hadn't noticed. I opened the text thread. I typed one word. I sent it. Understood. The same word I'd said at the dinner table in September when Preston declared my house was the family venue. The same word Denise had celebrated with a thumbs up. The same word they had interpreted as surrender. Except now it landed differently. Now it landed like a door closing. Preston called within 45 seconds. I answered. What does understood mean? Mom and Dad's house is flooding. They need somewhere to stay. Your house is right there, Grant. I understand the situation, Preston. I do. But Dad told me at my own dinner table, while eating food my wife cooked, that if I said no to hosting, I shouldn't come asking the family for anything. He said family goes both ways. So I'm letting it go both ways. Handle it. This is an emergency. This isn't about Thanksgiving. It wasn't about Thanksgiving when you declared my house was the permanent family venue either. It was about what you felt entitled to and what you assumed I'd do because I've always done it. I'm not doing it anymore. You're seriously going to let Mom and Dad sit in a freezing house because you're mad about some holidays? I'm not mad about anything, Preston. I'm understood. That's the word, right? That's what everyone wanted to hear. He hung up on me. I expected that. Denise and Howard spent 3 nights at a motel off Route 9. A motel with thin walls and a parking lot that smelled like exhaust and a continental breakfast that consisted of stale muffins and burnt coffee. The son with the biggest house, the house they had claimed as a family resource, the house they had never thanked him for opening, the house they had taken for granted for 3 years and $12,600 worth of groceries, was 20 minutes away with 4 empty bedrooms and a furnace running perfectly. But here is the part of the story that nobody in my family expected, because they had already decided who I was and what I would do, and they were wrong. On the second day of their motel stay, I called a plumber I knew from the trade, a guy named Ray Donato who did excellent work and charged fair prices. I explained the situation. I asked him to go to my parents' house, assess the damage, and start emergency repairs. I paid for the initial assessment and the first round of materials myself. I told Ray not to mention my name. Just show up, do the work, and send the bill to me. Ray went. He assessed the damage. He patched the burst line, pumped the standing water, and got the plumbing functional within 2 days. He called Howard to explain what he'd done and what still needed to happen long-term. Howard asked who had sent him. Ray said, "Your son arranged it." I know this because Howard called me that evening. He didn't say much. His voice was different, stripped of the authority it usually carried, quieter, like a man who had just been shown a version of his son he hadn't been willing to see before. "You sent the plumber," he said. "Yes. After everything. After everything." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "I shouldn't have said what I said. At your dinner table. About not coming to us. You said what you meant, Dad. And I heard you. But hearing you didn't mean I stopped caring. It just meant I stopped performing." He didn't respond. I heard him breathe. I heard something that might have been a clearing of the throat or might have been something else. Then he said, "Okay," and hung up. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 20 years. The family group chat erupted one more time after the pipes incident. Preston called me heartless for not taking in our parents during an emergency. Avery said I was making a point at the expense of elderly people. Denise stayed quiet, which was new. I didn't argue. I dropped the receipts. 3 years of hosting costs, $12,600. Offers to help or reciprocate, 0. Howard's exact quote from the September dinner. "Don't ask us for anything later." My response, "I didn't ask. And when you asked, I gave you the same word you gave me." Understood. Then I added one more thing. I also paid for the emergency plumber who fixed Mom and Dad's pipes. You're welcome to check with Ray Donato if you'd like to verify. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because that's what family actually looks like. Not performing generosity on demand, but choosing to help when it matters, on your own terms, because you want to. Not because someone declared it at your dinner table. The chat went silent. Not the awkward silence of people gathering their arguments. The deep, structural silence of people who have just been shown a mirror and don't like what's staring back. My cousin Jenna, Howard's niece, who had been lurking in the group chat without contributing, sent a message the next day. For what it's worth, Preston asked me last summer if he could use my lake house for Elliot's birthday party. Same energy. Told me it made sense because my place was bigger. I said no, and he didn't speak to me for 2 months. She added, "Grant, you're not crazy. This is what he does." It was the first time anyone in the extended family had validated what I'd been experiencing, and it landed harder than I expected. Because when you've been told you're selfish for long enough, even by people whose opinions shouldn't matter, some part of you starts to wonder if they're right. Jenna's message was a hand reaching through the noise to say, "You're not imagining this. The pattern is real, and you're not the only one who sees it." Preston's wife Avery, of all people, sent me a private message 2 days later. It said, "For what it's worth, I've told Preston 100 times to stop treating your house like a community center. He doesn't listen to me either. I'm sorry, I didn't respond, but I saved it, because it told me something I hadn't known, that even inside Preston's own household, someone recognized what was happening and was powerless or unwilling to stop it. The months that followed were a slow, careful recalibration. Denise stopped using the word complaining when she talked to me. She started asking, "Would you like to?" instead of "You should." Small change. Massive difference. Howard called more often. Short conversations about nothing in particular, the kind of calls that exist not to exchange information, but to maintain a connection that almost broke. Preston and I don't talk much. He never apologized for the declaration, the entitlement, or the 3 years of treating my home like a venue he'd booked for free. He still hasn't invited me to his apartment. Avery still posts photos from open houses. Some things don't change, but I've stopped expecting them to, and there's a freedom in that. The freedom of lowered expectations met with raised boundaries. Camille and I hosted Easter that spring. It was our choice, the first holiday we'd hosted in over a year, and the difference between this one and every one that came before was the difference between a gift and a tax. We invited a small group, Denise and Howard, 2 friends from the neighborhood, Camille's college roommate, and Jenna, the cousin who'd spoken up in the group chat. Everyone who came brought something. Jenna brought wine and a card. Our neighbor brought a salad she'd made from scratch. Camille's roommate brought a cake. And Denise arrived early. She came through the front door carrying a casserole dish wrapped in a towel, and she set it on the kitchen counter with a careful, almost ceremonial deliberateness. "I made sweet potatoes," she said. "I used your grandmother's recipe. I found it in that old recipe box you gave me years ago. I hope they're okay." Camille looked at that dish, and I watched her eyes fill up. She turned away so Denise wouldn't see, but I saw, and I understood. Not because sweet potatoes are emotional, but because in 3 years of hosting every holiday for the Holloway family, 3 years of cooking and cleaning and spending and serving, not a single person had ever walked through our door carrying something they'd made for us. Not one time. Not a single dish, not a single bottle, not a single dessert. And here was Denise, standing in our kitchen with her mother-in-law's sweet potato recipe, and something in her expression that looked like the slow, painful beginning of understanding what she had taken for granted and how close she had come to losing it entirely. Camille hugged her. Denise hugged back. Neither of them said anything about the last year. They didn't need to. The casserole dish said it. Howard offered to wash dishes after dinner. First time in his entire life. He rolled up his sleeves, stood at the sink, and ran the water without being asked, without being prompted, without anyone declaring that it was his job. I stood next to him washing, me drying, the kitchen warm and quiet, and neither of us said a word about what had happened between us. We didn't need to. The water ran. The plates came clean. And the silence between us was the good kind, not the loaded silence of avoidance, but the gentle, tired quiet of two people who had come through something hard and found each other on the other side. Preston wasn't there. He hadn't been invited, and he hadn't asked to come. Avery posted a photo that weekend of herself at a restaurant with the caption, "Easter brunch vibes," and 3 champagne emojis. The performance continued, but it continued without an audience, and without a venue, and without the brother who used to make it all possible while sitting quietly at his own table wondering when it would be his turn to be noticed. My brother once told me I had the biggest house. He was right. Camille and I built it with 9 years of early mornings and late nights and packed lunches and skipped vacations and YouTube tutorials and aching backs and the stubborn, beautiful belief that what we were building was ours and would remain ours, regardless of who decided it should belong to everyone. And it is ours. Every room, every wall, every door, especially the front door, which is big enough to open wide when we choose to, and heavy enough to close when we need to. The hinges work both ways. That's the part my family forgot. And that's the part they'll remember. Last Thanksgiving was the best one yet. Smaller table. Fewer people. Camille laughing at something Howard said, which might have been the first joke he'd told in 40 years, and which landed so unexpectedly that even Denise looked startled before she smiled. Denise in the kitchen, actually helping, actually present, her hands in the flour instead of folded in her lap. No Preston. No Avery. No performance. No declaration. Just food and family and the warm, hard-won quiet of a house that finally felt like it belonged to the people who built it. My brother declared my home was the family venue. My mother told me to stop complaining. My father told me I'd be cut off. I said understood. And I meant it, both times.